Hello, this is Dr. Randy Well. Today we're going to be talking about organizing and outlining your presentation. But first, I love to show this that says anything can go wrong, it will go wrong. That's Murphy's Law. And whenever you're trying to do a presentation, you just have to realize chances are something will go wrong. Very seldom have I ever had a perfect presentation. I have always found where something can go wrong. So the idea is just to be prepared for it. So as we talk about organizing and outlining your presentation, I first want to kind of make a point to you that your presentation is a speech that is taking the audience down a path. But we don't know what path you're taking us down. We have not heard it before. So it's very important that you create the path that we can follow and that you don't create what we call those little rabbit trails going off to the side. So your speech is not like a tree that goes many different directions. Your speech is like getting from point A to point B and kind of winds around with different types of information. So the way you do this is by creating a very effective outline that you can follow. Now, of course, outlines, you have introduction, which is what you're going to tell us basically. Then you have your body, and that's literally the telling us of the content. And then the conclusion is you're going to tell us what you basically told us. That's a real simplified way to look at it. But there's a lot of truth in that. What you're going to tell them, and what you told them. Now, every good speech has what we call the bookend approach. And those bookends are holding everything together. So your introduction and your conclusions are those bookends. The body are all those points in there. Unfortunately, what happens if you don't have one of those bookends, like you don't have that conclusion? What happens to your books? They fall apart. They all fall down probably. So always remember your introduction and your conclusion are just as important as the body. And the body has several points to it. It can have 1 point, it can have 100 points. Depends on how complicated it really is. So let's talk about your introduction. Your introduction is getting the audience's attention, giving them a reason to listen to you, giving them something relevant, maybe previewing to them your thesis statement. Now, how do you get people's attention? Well, you can do it by telling a story or by quoting a famous person or an expert. Quite often, stories are the best way if you're a good storyteller. And every story has a rise and it has a lower portion to it. It has a conflict into it. So if you're going to tell a story, I would suggest you Google storytelling and look at the different contents of a story before you actually try to tell the story so that you create a very, very good story. But sometimes just quoting a famous person or expert can be very, very effective. Just like this one here from Albert Einstein, the difference between stupidity and genius is that genius has its limits. Oh my gosh, how true that is. Now, I think it's rather humorous myself. That tells me that people who are stupid have no limits. You just can't stop stupidity. I have actually used this before, giving a speech, telling this quote out. And it's a great way to kind of get the audience engaged by telling a humorous quote. Now, next thing is you can get their attention by citing startling statistics or asking the audience a rhetorical question. So, for example, you can sit there and ask a question is, how many different languages are spoken in the U.S.? Now, that's a rhetorical question. You could get someone who answer it, or you can actually say, we know there's lots of languages. How many languages do we think there are? Or you could just put up a startling statistics. And here's a great one that says the common languages, excluding English and Spanish, they're in different areas. I'm actually in Texas, so Vietnamese is the third spoken language. I can go through here and I sit there and I think that's interesting. How did French get to be so popular in, that must be North Carolina, or Arabic in Tennessee, Polish in Illinois? So once again, here is a kind of a startling statistics that could get people interested. Next thing is now you're going to tell them things, but if you start off your speech with my presentation is about, or today I'm going to talk about, or my name is John Smith, you know what you're going to do? You're going to come through looking pretty stupid on that. Just like the little cartoon says here, is that people get excited until you start getting into the kind of, I'm going to talk about such and such today. No, no, no. You build into that. Otherwise, your audience is going to look like this. If you make a stupid statement like today I'm going to tell you about, you may not think that's stupid, but actually is a poor way to get into a speech. Now, after you got your introduction, we're going to go into the body. And when the body of the speech, it can be either informative or persuasive. Informative speeches are organized in terms of chronological or topical. So for example, if you're going to talk about the creation of the airplane, you're going to talk about the Wright brothers all the way up to when it was a mail service and airliners and military, 1940s, all the way up to, the 747s are flying now. Okay, that would be chronological. Or topical, if you're going to talk about airplanes, you could be topical. You're going to talk about military planes, civilian planes, and planes are going to be going to outer space. Persuasive works a little different. Persuasive is organized through cause and effect or problem and solution. This is the problem. Here's a solution. Cause and effect is that, and I'll use the example of the Boeing plane that had problems with the software. Because they had problems with the software, the effect was they had planes that crashed. And unfortunately, people were killed in the process. That's the way you go through persuasive. And then you come through the conclusion that calls for action one way or the other. Now, your conclusion is where you summarize your presentation. You may re-emphasize things in there. You're trying to motivate your audience to respond. And you've got to provide good closure to your presentation. Now, how do you go about doing this? Well, there's several ways, but one thing for sure is that you do not want to have an abrupt ending. You actually do want to go in there and have an ending. Think of your speech is going to go up and it's going to come down. You just don't drop them off. Remember I told you about the bookend? You have to have a conclusion. If you don't, it just falls apart and people are left hanging. Next thing is don't ramble on. I find myself doing this sometimes. I get to the conclusion. I'm just kind of like, I just want to say a few more things. I just start rambling. That's a problem. Give no new information. All of your information was in the body of the speech. And always develop your conclusion next to last. What is the last thing that you would develop? You know what it is? It's your introduction. You develop the body of your speech first, then your conclusion, and then you go develop your introduction on that. And always have yourself a nice outline. And there's several types of outlines to do. But I want to show you something here. It says if there's no B, that there can be no B if there's not an A. So for example, you have the main point, you have an A and a B. If you don't have a B, you cannot have an A because the main point basically is A. And likewise, see under B here, you have the first subdivision and then the second subdivision. If you just had the first subdivision, B would not be two subdivisions, it would be the second subdivision is. So this is just some basics of how you do an outline. Nothing in details there. So various different types of outlines. You wonder what that bit has to do with this? I have no idea. The publisher put that in there, but it's always to me interesting how sometimes things just drop in that have nothing to do with anything. But in this case here, let's talk about outlines. You have a working outline, which is your rough draft. You have a formal outline where you contains entire lines of your speech in there. You literally can read your speech off of that outline. And you have a speaking outline, which is using keywords. It would use key phrases, things that actually will help you to just remember what you're going to do. So for example, here you can have those full sentences, which is the speaking outline, or you can have phrases, or you can have just those key words. Now I want to show you something here very quickly, and this is a manuscript. This is where maybe you don't have the outline except for the outlines there just to help you to write your speech out. So you can have extemporaneous, which means you have no cards, key phrases, key comments, key words. You could also have a manuscript, and the manuscript is where everything is written. Now this actually was delivered by King George VI, King George VI, And this was going into World War II. And he starts off with, in this grave hour, perhaps the most faithful in our history, I send to every household of my people. Now, what he was doing, if you write a manuscript like this here, he was underlining key words he wanted to emphasize. The red slashes actually meant that he wanted to have a pause, because that pause creates seriousness. So you want people to see how serious things are. So he would read it as, in this grave hour, perhaps the most faithful in our history. So what he was doing was trying to put emphasis on grave and faithful in every household, not just the households, every household. So this is what you call writing a manuscript, which once again is based upon writing your outline and then actually putting each word down that you're going to read or memorize, however you go about doing that. And this is the end of this talk about how you organize and put together the outline for your presentation. Once again, remember, if something's going to go wrong, it will go wrong. The only way to avoid that is to make sure you're totally prepared in writing a good outline, getting your conclusion, getting your introduction. Remember, in the body you write first, then you write your conclusion, and then you go write your introduction. And last thing I will tell you is that the reason why you do that is because 9 times out of 10, if you write your introduction first, you write your body and conclusion, you had to go back and rewrite your introduction because you realize that you kind of changed what you're talking about. Your introduction no longer matches how you were talking. I hope you enjoy this, and we look forward to talking to you again.